Hi guys and welcome back to my channel. My name's Abby. If you're new, welcome. I'm so happy to have you here. So in today's video I want to talk about some of the most common hamster care mistakes. The vast majority of these mistakes comes down to bad advice given by pet shops. It's very frustrating because I feel like if you are getting an animal from somewhere, that person who is giving you that animal has some kind of duty to make sure that it has the proper care and that you know some of the basics. Unfortunately, in the UK and in the US, a lot of gimmicky kind of products are sold for our pets. In the UK, I do believe that we are getting better, but America, I'm not so sure about. So in today's video, I want to talk about some of the most common hamster care mistakes. So hopefully this can educate a few people and maybe you'll learn something new. The first mistake I want to talk about in this video is solely going off the advice given by the pet shop. So it might be that you are buying your hamster from the pet shop, getting it from a rescue at a pet shop, or just simply buying your supplies from there. And unfortunately, the staff members aren't always educated on proper hamster care. And also, unfortunately, the pet shops do sell products which are advertised for hamsters which aren't actually suitable. If you're watching this video, you already have not made that mistake because you are doing research outside of the pet shop. So that is 10 out of 10. Good job for doing that. I would just recommend either joining Facebook groups, forums, just researching online, look at different countries' hamster care. If you look at the hamster care guidance in Germany versus the UK or the US, they are so vastly different. And I feel like we could learn a lot from German hamster care. So do a bit of research. Even the RSPCA's recommendations are a lot better than the recommendations from pet shops. Just make sure that you do a bit more reading about hamster care and not just from the pet shop. The second thing that I want to talk about is using a hamster cage which is too small from a pet shop. In a lot of pet stores, they heavily advertise colourful cages for hamsters, cages with lots of levels, cages with tubes for your hamster, and a lot of these are very colourful and have even stickers and all sorts. These cages are actually marketed towards children so that children will see the cage and think, oh my gosh, I want to get a hamster. How cute is that? I can have a little furry friend in this rainbow fairy magic cage. Which, yes, that is a lovely idea, but the thing is they really need to have a big enough enclosure. So you can obviously decorate cages to be really fun, but they need to be big enough, and unfortunately so many sold in pet shops are not big enough for your hamster. There is one cage which is sold by Pets at Home, which is the Savic Hamster Heaven cage, and that is very appealing for children, and it is quite a large cage that I would say is big enough. It does reach the minimum, and that cage is very colourful. It's got lots of different tubes and stuff, and it does look really fun. So I would say that cage is a step in the right direction. Like I said, you can add in tubes and fun things into your hamster's cage, but it does have to be the recommended size. So what I personally recommend doing is either getting that Savic Hamster Heaven or buying another cage which is big enough. The recommended size is 80 centimeters by 50 centimeters or bigger, and then just add in lots of fun colourful accessories yourself instead of going out and buying one of those really gimmicky ones. They also have things like advertising it so you attach one cage to another with tubes. Although that is expanding the space for the hamster, they do actually need unbroken floor space, so that means that they can run around the whole cage. Hamsters in the wild do run between 5 and 10 miles every night. Just because hamsters are small doesn't mean that they should live in a small enclosure. The next thing I want to talk about, which is a very common hamster care mistake, is using these houses and chews, which they sell them in America and in the UK, and they are often called like Snack Shack. There's a few different versions of them. Some of them are logs, some of them are little huts. I personally have had these in the past before I knew about them. They are made out of honey honey and sawdust together. So the honey is there to entice the hamsters to chew. Obviously, hamsters' teeth grow for their entire lives, so they do need things to chew on. But since this is sawdust and honey, the hamsters taste it and it tastes like food, and that means that they try and eat it, which then leads them to ingesting sawdust, which obviously is not a very healthy thing to do. Hamsters do not need to eat sawdust. Another thing is, as they chew them, they can get quite sharp, so I would just try and steer clear from these completely. There are a lot of really cute wooden houses, hides, and things like that that you can get, which are okay and safe for them, instead of using these snack shack things. I just really don't recommend them at all. Another thing that is a very, very common mistake is using inappropriate bedding in the cage. By this, I mean the substrate that you put around the whole cage. I have done this in the past as well. So if you go into Pets at Home, they have these massive bags of like wood shavings, and although there are some wood shavings which are suitable for hamsters, there are very few. So it's things like aspen and hemp beddings. Those are completely fine, and even some kiln dried pine wood shavings. However, the wood shavings that you get from Pets at Home are called wood shavings, and they do not specify what kind of wood it is. So it is commonly believed that this wood is not suitable for hamsters because it is believed that this wood is pine. Pine is actually toxic to hamsters. What happens is the wood actually releases these toxins, which can over time cause your hamster to become ill and potentially have respiratory infections and issues like that. Another type of bedding which is often used, which is not suitable for hamsters, is anything which is scented. Again, they have very sensitive respiratory systems. Basically, the scented bedding can really irritate their respiratory system, and so it's best just to avoid using a scented bedding. A lot of people get scented beddings for the reason that they think it smells better and stops the cage from smelling like hamster wee, but there are a few different ways that you can prevent their cage from smelling. A lot of hamsters do litter train themselves, and they will go in one corner all the time, and so you can just clean that corner out. If your hamster doesn't do that, what you can do is take their soiled bedding, a little amount, and put it in one corner, and then they will learn and just use that corner, and then so that means that you can just clean out that corner every few days, and that will prevent the cage from smelling. So I would recommend just using a plain paper-based bedding and cleaning out any soiled bedding every few days, and that would just prevent them from smelling. Now, the next hamster care mistake I am guilty of in the past myself before I knew any better, and that is using hamster balls. So these are obviously advertised at the pet shop, supposed to be really good for their exercise. I can almost see why people would think these are a good idea, but putting your hamster in these can be very stressful for them because it prevents them from using their usual ways to navigate the world, and so it can be quite frightening for them. But arguably, even worse than that, these do have slits in for ventilation. So these ventilation slits are big enough that some hamsters have actually got their toes or their paws caught in these, and has resulted in them either breaking a toe or breaking a foot, and in some cases even toes have ripped off, and that is horrific. That is something that I would never ever risk with my hamsters. Now I've heard about it, so I will not be using this in future, and personally I do not recommend anyone else takes that risk. Another thing similar to this is hamster cars. So it's basically a wheel inside of a car kind of structure. I'll include a picture on screen, but these usually have the same risks with the slits, and again, they're stressful for hamsters as well. So people recommend using these hamster balls for exercise and for some free roam time, but I personally recommend either setting up a playpen or making a safe space for your hamster to free roam, and they will be completely fine. They don't need to go in these balls at all. Another common mistake with hamster care is housing two hamsters together. If you go to a pet shop to get your hamster and you are getting a dwarf hamster, quite often the sales assistants will recommend that you get two to house together if they are dwarfs. Although in some cases they can live together happily, unfortunately in a lot of cases hamsters can live together for a period of time completely happy and you won't notice anything is wrong and they'll seem like they're getting along, and then one day they'll just snap and then they'll have a fight. And the thing about this is hamsters are nocturnal, so if you are asleep when this happens you might not be able to break up the fight, and in some cases this results in one of the hamsters unfortunately dying or getting very injured. So personally I would never recommend doing this whatsoever. I would just recommend always housing hamsters on their own. They don't get lonely, they don't mind being on their own at all. Personally, I just wouldn't take the risk. Another thing that people will do is if they have two Syrian hamsters or two hamsters that live separately, giving them play dates. I do not recommend ever introducing your hamster to another hamster. Introducing your hamster to another hamster can be very stressful, and as well they can fight, and you just don't want to take that risk. Another thing that I would like to talk about, which is often sold in pet shops, which is infuriating to me because it is not okay, is giving hamsters cotton bedding. So sometimes it's called hamster fluff and things like that, but it is not suitable to give your hamster. This cotton bedding has long fibres and there is so many ways that this can harm your hamster. So one of the ways it can harm your hamster is hamsters will pouch their bedding and their food. So they will fill their pouches with their bedding and then go and make a little nest somewhere in their cage. And if they're putting this cotton bedding into their mouth, it can get caught in their pouches, and if they ever ingested it by accident, it can cause blockages in their digestive system. They can also choke on this kind of bedding. There has also been cases where hamsters have had one of these fibres wrapped around their leg or around their toe, and this can cause them to lose circulation and their hands or feet can become very swollen, and this can cause injuries. And sometimes when a hamster is distressed, if they notice that it is this fibre that's wrapped around their arm, if they can't get it off, they will actually start to gnaw away at their own flesh, which is horrific. I would not want to ever risk my hamster going through that experience. So I really do not recommend using fluffy bedding ever at all. Don't do it. It just is not worth the risk. I personally have used Carefresh as the substrate in the whole cage, and that bedding I find is really good because it is almost fluffy, but it's paper based. So this means that it does not have these long fibres and it can be easily broken apart, and if a hamster puts it in their cheeks, if it was to get stuck, it would go soggy and like dissolve kind of thing. You know what happens like with like toilet paper if it gets wet. It's the same kind of thing, whereas obviously cotton doesn't do that, and that's why it can cause so many risks. Another thing that I've included on this list is cleaning out the cage too often. So like I said earlier, people often use scented bedding to try and hide the smell of the hamster's cage, but what actually might be a problem which is causing your hamster cage to smell could actually be that you're cleaning it out too often. If you're actually cleaning out the cage too often, your hamster's going to scent mark because they want to claim that as their territory. It actually can be stressful for hamsters to have a full cage clean often, so I'll just tell you how often I do my cage. In the corners of my cage I have a little sandbox, and my hamsters have actually trained themselves to wee in that box, and they do not wee anywhere else in their cage. They do get some droppings in their bed, and also in that sandbox, but that's generally it. So every few days, every week, I will clean out the sandbox and I'll spot clean some of the droppings from their bed, and that just keeps the cage clean for a bit longer. And then once a month I will take out half of the bedding and replace that with fresh bedding. The reason why I do this is because that other half of bedding has their scent on it, so it stops them from being stressed out because they recognize that scent and it is still their environment, their territory. And really, me doing this, I do not notice my hamsters smell unless I leave the sandbox a few days too long. That is the only time it will ever smell. So I just really do not recommend cleaning out your cage too often. I know it sounds counterproductive if you find your hamster cage is smelling, but trust me, it will smell a lot worse if you clean it all the time. And the very last thing that I want to include in this video is using the wrong size wheel. So like I said earlier about the cages that are sold in pet shops quite often, they have a lot of gimmicks and they often seem to include things like a water bottle, a food bowl, a wheel. Those are all things to entice you to obviously buy that cage, but unfortunately, the wheels are often completely inappropriately sized. Some of them being 6 inches, which is tiny. That is too small even for a dwarf hamster. So I do not recommend using those wheels at all. I have done this in the past whenever I have had cages from the pet shop and they have come with the small wheel. I have done this myself. The reason why using a wheel that is too small is bad for your hamster is because it bends their spine and that can be really, really painful for them. So you need to make sure that you have a wheel which is big enough that their back can be completely flat straight across and they are not bending it like this, because that can cause a lot of pain in their spine. So obviously it depends on the size of your hamster. If you have a dwarf hamster, they can have a lot smaller of a wheel than a Syrian hamster. As a general rule of thumb, a 20cm wheel will always be alright for a dwarf hamster, and a 28cm wheel will always be okay for a Syrian. This is just a general consensus. I will hopefully put on what that is in inches as well. I personally have the silent spinner wheels in 28cm since I have 2 Syrian hamsters. So I hope this video hasn't been too much of a downer. Everyone makes mistakes, and if you have made any of these mistakes, please do not worry. We have all done it. All that matters is we do the very best that we can for our pets, and that's all that anyone can really ask for. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned something new. If you did like this video, please leave a like down below. It helps me out so much. And if you're interested in seeing more content like this, don't forget to subscribe, and hopefully I'll see you in a new video soon. Bye!